This talk I titled, "Have you seen this before?" because I talked on this subject once before. But it's an essential subject, so I'll repeat the process. These are three core teachings that we're going to discuss. And I said in the handout, the core ideas of the first turning have never been declared obsolete, even after 2,500 years. Of these core ideas, three groups are considered sufficient for a complete path. In other words, if you can master all three of these groups of efforts, then you have a complete path up to the path of seeing, which is the immediate goal. The path of seeing is not full enlightenment, but it's the first stage of the bodhisattva grounds, the bodhisattva bhumis. So in order to get to the first bhumi, the joyful, one has to do certain practices rather assiduously. The foundation and pivot of the whole business is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a universal. Every spiritual practice has some form of it. It's really very simple. It's a matter of being aware in the present moment. And if we're aware in the present moment, then we're not daydreaming, we're not worrying about the future, we're not thinking about the past, we're not making plans. We're just there, present, in the present moment. Ironically, that's the only place you can contact the body. If you think about it, memories of the past, where's the body? It's ephemeral. It doesn't exist solidly. Likewise, memory plans for the future. The body's not in the future. The body's in the present moment. So we use the body as an anchor. And in our group, the usual process is to follow the breath. The breath can be followed as a complete action of the body. It can be followed by watching the nostril, the breath in and out of the nostrils and the upper lip, how it is warmer on the exhale than the inhale. All kinds of things about the breath we don't notice. But the fact is, watching the breath is a little bit boring. So what happened is the mind wanders again. And when the mind wanders, when you notice that it's wandered, then you gently bring it back to the breath. And the mindfulness meditation is this continual process of noticing and returning. We notice that we've wandered from our object of meditation, and there's 40 of them, but the one we use is the breath. And when it has wandered from the object of meditation, then you bring it back to the breath, back to the object. You
said there's 40 of them? What are you referring to?
40 kinds of meditation in the old Pali tradition. There are things like a Buddha statue. I think a candle flame might be among the 40. They'd sit in caves and get a disc of blue clay and put the blue clay in front of their meditation seat and focus on the blue clay. There's 10 meditations about dead bodies. You have a rotting corpse, you have a skeleton, you have a hacked corpse, and so on like that for 10 kinds of corpses. The idea there is by meditating on the dead bodies, you're releasing some of the greed and lust that is in our minds, because it's a reminder that, well, it all ends, and sooner than we think it all ends. So those are all good meditations. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the three jewels. We take refuge in the Buddha, who is the awakener. We take refuge in the Dharma, which is the teachings of awakening. And we take refuge in the Sangha, the group of people that are practicing the Dharma. the bodhisattvas. So you can use those as an object of meditation. You can use Buddha as an object of meditation. You can meditate on the Sangha and the joys of being in a Sangha, how we help each other wake up and support each other in various ways. You can meditate on the Dharma. You can meditate on specific items in the Dharma, like say the Four Holy Truths. There is suffering. Suffering has a cause. Action in the past is its cause. There is a cessation of suffering, and there is a path to the cessation of suffering. You can review that in the mind in a concentrated state, and that counts as a meditation. But the first thing to do is to get in a place where we're more aware during the day. And to be more aware during the day, we practice sitting meditation. And the awareness spills over into the daily activity. So we wake up a little bit. And as we wake up a little bit, we notice, I'm on automatic pilot most of the time. And I do things with my body, and I wasn't even aware that I did them. What am I in? Did I lock the door or not? Sometimes I have to go back and check it because we don't want to leave the door open. So we're clearly pretty unmindful during the average day. And it takes a lot of practice to get to the place where we can be more aware during the day. But the key is exactly sitting meditation. Now there's a Pali scripture called the Satipatthana, the applications of mindfulness. Sati being the Pali word for mindfulness. It means remembering. The Sanskrit word for it is smriti, which means remembering. So you're remembering to come back to the present moment. You're remembering to return to your object of meditation. And that carried over. Tenpa is the Tibetan for that. It means remembering. And Nien is the Chinese for that. It means remembering. So we're basically remembering to return to the present moment. I'll recite the English for the Pali scripture. A spiritual practitioner remains established in the observation of the body, in the body, diligent, with clear understanding, mindful, having abandoned every craving and every distaste for this life. A spiritual practitioner remains established in the observation of the feelings, in the feelings, diligent, with clear understanding, mindful, having abandoned every craving and every distaste for this life. A spiritual practitioner remains established in the observation of the mind, in the mind, diligent, with clear understanding, mindful, having abandoned every craving and every distaste for this life. A spiritual practitioner remains established in the observation of the objects of the mind, in the objects of the mind, diligent, with clear understanding, mindful, having abandoned every craving and every distaste for this life. Now that's fairly straightforward. Spiritual practitioner, actually the original Pali is bhikshu, the name for an ordained monk. But in those days, in the days of the core teachings, there were only monks and nuns pretty much. The laity would show up at the assemblies, but the laity ordinarily didn't practice much. Their job was to support the monks. So the only people that did the meditations were the monks and nuns. Remains established in the observation is the tricky part. We can start with the observation, but the mind is going to drift away, and we have to bring it back to the object of meditation. So that's remains established in the observation is a goal we need to aim for. And then there are four things we observe: the body, the feelings, which in this case refer to the positive, negative, and neutral reactions to a sense impression. So it's really the raw material for the emotions. We're not observing the emotions themselves. We're observing the raw material of the emotions, which is these three reactions to a sense impression. So we're going moment by moment by moment with the idea of being awake during each successive moment, if we can. So you're observing the body, observing the feelings, then observing the mind. The mind is thoughts and emotions. It's that word chitta, which is used all over the place. The Hindus have Sat, Chit, Ananda, being, consciousness, and bliss. And that's that same Chit, consciousness. But here we have the thoughts and the emotions that we're observing. And then that final, the fourth one, objects of the mind. It's best to take that as the phenomena that arise in the mind. Objects of the mind are also the sense perceptions. You could use the sensorium as a object of meditation. Technically, the objects of the mind are the dharmas, that's a small d. The dharmas are constituents of our experience. I call them atoms of experience. Because every moment, a certain number of these kinds of dharmas, there are 100 of them or so, some of these kinds of dharmas manifest and arise as a moment of experience. I call that a molecule of experience, because you're literally taking these atoms of experience and combining them to make a moment. And then the moments rise and fall and come and go, and there are different experiences in each moment. And as we slow our minds down, we have more moments to deal with. One of the things you notice, like if you're downtown on a busy sidewalk, there's a lot going on, and the thoughts flow fast, and you don't ordinarily recognize most of the thinking that's going on, because it's a constant stream. So when you slow the mind down, then you begin to be able to clearly cognize a given thought. And the principle is, don't elaborate on it, don't associate on it, don't carry it out to its implications. Just purely observe the object. If it's a feeling, okay, I'm feeling good. So I observe that. I don't think, well, I'm feeling good because, I had a good meeting with a friend and so on like that. It's just, I feel good. And then the next moment I hear a sound I don't like, and that's an unpleasant sound, so now I don't like that. But that's the observation of the feelings. And it's a feeling every different moment. Observation of the mind, again, the thoughts and emotions that flow through the mind. And the objects of the mind I did mention is the dharmas, but the dharmas are so fast that you can't slow down enough in this current condition we're in, situations we're in, because it's not conducive to slowing the mind down sufficiently to perceive the dharmas, the individual atoms of experience. So we do the best we can to slow our minds down, but to get to that level, you'd have to live in a cave and do massive amounts of meditation every day, or some equivalent retreat situation. So for objects of the mind, use the phenomena of mind that come and go as rapidly as the dharmas appear and disappear. What do they mean, observation of the body in the body, the feelings in the feelings? After discussion, we decided it probably means the body as such, the feelings as such, not the body as an exemplar of the anatomy of Homo sapiens or whatever extra attributes you put on the body, just the raw observation of the body in the present moment. So the body as such, the body in the body. And likewise the feelings, not as the root of grand aesthetic compositions of music or art, but feelings as they occur in the moment, positive, negative, or neutral. And if you do this a long time, the result is greater awareness. Now, mindfulness is sufficiently pivotal that these three basic practices, and you can practice these items, all contain mindfulness as a key item. And the reason for that is exactly that it's ubiquitous. We can't do without the mindfulness. The Buddha said that if you practice mindfulness, that's the fastest way to transforming the suffering into bliss. And we believe it, but we're still practicing, so we occasionally experience that. What can you say? It's a long road. The second of the three core items that I'm going to discuss is the Noble Eightfold Path. And of course, that's part of the Four Noble Truths. So you can't really do the Noble Eightfold Path without having thoroughly understood the Four Truths. And the Four Truths are a overarching category for all of the teachings of the Dharma. There's no teaching that I've ever come across that doesn't belong under one of the Four Truths. Either that there is suffering, that there is a cause of suffering, that there is a cessation of suffering, and there is a path to the cessation of suffering. So we look at the suffering and realize, okay, pain is inevitable because of the nature of the world system we live in. But suffering is extra, it's optional. We don't have to make a big deal out of our pain and make up elaborate stories and have all kinds of emotional reactions to our suffering. But if we can get rid of that, they call it the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain or the unpleasant experience in itself. The second arrow is what our crazy minds make of that, the elaboration, the stories about it, and all that. So we want to get rid of that second arrow. We want to get rid of that suffering, which is not necessary. Why suffer unnecessarily? If I stub my toe, great, it hurts. But if I start cussing at the log that I stubbed my toe on, what does that do? It just raises anger in the mind and stirs up all these negative biochemicals in the system. So we want to remain in a state of equanimity. Even though there is pain, they say that the suffering, some of them are inevitable, like birth, old age, sickness, and death. We all experience, old age, decay, and death. I'm wrestling with that experience as we speak. And it starts at birth. But the human being is moving the fastest and is the freshest at conception. And even though it multiplies and grows and grows and grows, it's actually slowing down already. And then you get to your youth, and the slowing down is not perceptible because you're still growing and expanding and experiencing all these new experiences. But as you get to maturity, you begin to notice, well, it's not working as well as it used to. And then as we get towards old age, decay, and death, we begin to realize that the impermanence that's been in our face all along is something that accelerates for us as we get older. So that's a suffering or a pain that is inevitable as long as we're in these bodies. The other sufferings that we create for ourselves have to do with not getting what we want. We want something, didn't get it, then that produces a negative emotion that's not necessary. You did get it, and now you discover it's not what you thought, and you're not happy with it. That's a suffering. You are in the presence of what you don't like, what you don't want, and you get that instead. That's suffering. So there are all these sufferings we go through that if we were to tame our minds and transmute our consciousness so as to be in the state of joy, then those sufferings would all go away. The pain would still be there, but we can deal with that as it comes up. So that's the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. The second noble truth is the truth of the origin of suffering. And after deep, deep concentration in the watches of the night before his final enlightenment, Shakyamuni penetrated the cause and effect behind our experience. And his conclusion was that the cause of our suffering is our own actions in the past. In other words, we get karmic results from the things that we have done, good, bad, and indifferent. So all of the fortunate circumstances we have are due to good actions. All the unfortunate circumstances we have are due to bad actions. And it's a very intricate process, this cause and effect. It's hard to say what karma, what action causes what effects. So we're still in the realm of speculation, but we know for a fact that this cause and effect mechanism is in force all the time. And there's a practical application of this, if that's so. And a lot of people don't know that it's so. If it's so that our own actions create our reality, our world, improve our world by improving our actions. And this is where the ethical piece of Buddhism comes in. As we increase our ethics, as we become better people, then more fortunate circumstances arise and fewer unfortunate circumstances arise. So our lives are transformed for the better. And eventually we reach the path of seeing, which is a satori, a total awakening for that moment. And then we have to practice what we've seen in that moment to gradually unfold the results of the path, the other 9 bodhisattva stages, and then the final enlightenment. The third noble truth is the truth of cessation of suffering. Nirvana is possible. It's possible in this world, messed up as it is, to actually achieve serenity, compassion, and all of the positive aspects of the human consciousness. So knowing that that's possible is, again, a fact that most people are unaware of. There's a lot of despair out there because they don't realize there is a way out, there is a solution. It may involve hard practice, but there's a solution. And then the final of the 4 truths is the truth of the path, the Eightfold Path. And that's what we're discussing here. This is the second thing to practice after practicing mindfulness indefinitely, all the time, whatever else you do. So the items of the Noble Eightfold Path start out with the 2 of wisdom, right view and right intention. Right view is samyak drishti. And I use the Sanskrit because sometimes there are multiple translations for a term. And if you use the Sanskrit, you know exactly what term you're talking about. Samyak means right, and drishti means seeing. So right view. And this understanding is of the interdependent nature of all phenomena. That's the view, that everything is interconnected with everything else. There's nothing separate. There's nothing that you can take out or remove. And yet we can create dependent arisings. We can create dependent arisings according to our positive actions, rather than dependent arisings that involve more misery. So understanding the view of emptiness, the view of interdependence of all phenomena, interlinking, interbeing is what Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. That's the right view. And that we born and we die miserably like dogs, and that's the end of it. That's one view. We consider that a wrong view. And likewise, that my actions don't determine anything about my future. That's a wrong view. Because what goes around comes around, and our actions are going to come back to us in some fashion. Okay, that's the first of the Noble Eightfold Path. The second one is called right intention, samyak samkalpa. And this kalpa, that root KLP, means to cut or divide. So right intention, I don't know why they call it that, because the Sanskrit literally means right discernment. But traditionally, it has to do with attitude and motivation, which is absolutely key in our activity. You can do a good thing for a bad motivation, and there's not as much good karma, not as much merit attached to that. You can also do a bad thing with good motivation. The standard Bodhisattvic story about that is there's a boat full of pilgrims, and there's a bodhisattva on board who has very deep discernment. And he discerns that one of the people on board is about to kill everybody. Is another one of these terrorist mass murder things. So he kills the guy. And, he's done an evil act. He's killed somebody. He's taken a life. But he's also saved 50 other lives. So even though that karma has to be paid, it's still in balance. Much greater merit to save 50 people than to remove a perpetrator from his crime, thus preventing him from generating that bad karma for himself. Now that's pretty rococo, but that's the story. The idea being that ethics in this system are situational, and what's a good and bad action or what's a necessary action varies according to the situations. So samyak samkalpa is a way of discerning all that, and that generates our right attitude, our proper motivation. You want to do it for the benefit of all sentient beings, not merely for the benefit of yourself. And to the extent that you can objectively do your positive actions for the benefit of everyone, to that extent the action becomes more positive and the result is more positive. So there's your two aspects of wisdom, right view and right intention. Then there is the ethical piece, right speech, right action, right livelihood. And right speech is defined as not lying, not gossiping, not slandering people behind their back, avoiding harsh speech, divisive speech, and avoiding idle chatter. So there are 4 items of right speech that are traditionally focused on. So if you're working this step on the Eightfold Path, you're watching your tongue. And for starters, objectively observing what you're saying, and then eventually regulating what you're saying a little bit. You know when not to say certain things. Down the line, if you want to really, really practice deeply, then you have to work on not thinking certain things, not having a covetous mind, not having an angry mind. But stopping those emotions is difficult, and it's not advisable at first. Hold it in place and look at it objectively, impartially. That's what that is. And then it dissolves of its own accord. But eventually it's possible to remove those negative emotions entirely through fairly long practice. Anyway, for ethics, we have right speech, right action, no killing, instead turn it around, enhance life, save life, no stealing, turn that around, be generous, no lying, turn that around, and manifest the truth, no sexual misconduct, honor the body instead, and then right livelihood has to do with how you make your living. Is it harmful? Are you building A-bombs? Are you serving your fellow man in some way? And And to the extent that we can generate right livelihood, now oddly enough, in the Buddha's time, right livelihood for the monks consists in begging their food every day. This is something you can't readily do in this society. It's considered very, very low life to be begging your food, begging your daily bread. But in the Buddha's day, it was thought to be a virtue because you're then not attached. And you're also not grabbing for anything. You're simply accepting whatever is given to you. But those days are past and we have to adjust. So we want to make a healthy and happy and helpful lifestyle. And there are numerous possibilities, even in this degenerate age, to find excellent things that you can do with your time that earn your daily bread. Another key effort is right effort. This is one of those things that also pervades the entire realm of Buddhist practice. Effort can be joyful. It's diligence. It's not like you're banging your head against a wall, knocking yourself out. It's measured diligence. It's constant effort to practice. Do things that you don't really want to do or that you don't feel like doing when you know it's beneficial to do them. Like I skipped my meditation this morning, running out of time. Well, okay, it would have been better to meditate even 10 minutes, but I didn't in that case. But we keep making these efforts, and the more we make them, the easier it is to be diligent about the Dharma. So there's a certain amount of getting easier, as well as that overall situation of the practice getting harder as you go on, getting more demanding as you go on. But we meet those demands through our aspiration and our, if you will, attachment to the Dharma. Enough about that. Okay, so you have right effort, and then right mindfulness is the seventh item. I've already covered mindfulness as the essential awareness of the present moment. And then there's right concentration. Samyak Samadhi. Now, samadhi is a curious word. In Hindu parlance, samadhi is that state where you put it all together. It's that state of realization, a state essentially like nirvana. In Buddhism, the words used in Hinduism have slightly different meanings, or sometimes radically different meanings. Like the word dharma itself, it means the teachings, it means those atoms of experience. There are several other meanings to dharma, that which upholds the universe, if you will. You can use dharma in that sense. But in Hindu, dharma is an individual optimum life path. If you're manifesting your dharma, you're doing your duty in this society, you're doing your conscientious labor, you're helping other people, and so on. Each person's dharma is slightly different, and apparently we have to discover what our purpose is, what our real dharma is. But that's rarely used in the Buddhist context, though I've thought of it because it's a good concept. But we're going to talk dharma as being the teachings of the Buddha, the things that are conducive to awakening, and also that mysterious cosmological process that keeps the universe in manifestation. Now, samadhi is a state of deep concentration, and you have to be aware. You can concentrate and get so far into the concentration that you lose consciousness. You don't want to do that. Samadhi involves being awake as well as being heavily one-pointed concentration. There are all kinds of flowery names for different samadhis. Not having experienced them, I don't know how different they are one from the other. But basically, you're putting it together, you're setting it in place, you have one-pointed focus on the object of meditation. When you get that level of concentration, that's advanced shamatha in our terms, then you can begin to effectively use vipassana. Vipassana being the, not in there, vipassana being the observation of the phenomena of mind. You can do that anytime. You can do it during meditation, even mindful meditation. Watch carefully what the mind is doing and note it. Again, not following it out, not following the associations, not following the implications, not following the origins, just the raw experience itself. And yet, if you add the one-pointed concentration to that review, then a lot more phenomena of mind come into view. And again, as you slow the thought down, slow the thinking down a little bit, then all these thoughts that ordinarily flit by so fast that we're not aware of them come into view. And then you have to work on them. If you have a negative emotion that keeps arising again and again, then working on that is a good idea. Trying to decrease the frequency of that negative emotion. So following the Eightfold Path totally is going to lead to nirvana. We follow it as best we can and gradually approach the path of seeing. Talk a little bit about the path of seeing. There are 5 paths. And the first path is the one we're on. That's called the path of accumulation. And you practice and gain merit and wisdom. The idea being, the more wisdom you have, the more good deeds you've generated, the easier it is to advance on the path. So, in the path of accumulation, we're accumulating merit through virtuous action and pious action, if you will. Devotional Dharma practices generate merit. Again, virtuous action generates merit. And when sufficient merit is gathered, then the path gets more serious, and you enter the path of the yogic path, the path of linking, as they call it. And that has 4 aspects: heat, summits, patience, and supreme mundane dharmas. And I won't get into those details at this point. But from there, from the supreme mundane dharmas, that's the top of samsara. That's the top of the world. From there, you can make a leap to the path of seeing, which involves total realization of emptiness. At that point, you totally understand the 4 Noble Truths in their finest detail. What they're for, how to work them, all that. And, it's a single aha moment. And with that aha moment, then we become we become noble persons rather than ordinary foolish common people, which we still are. So the path of seeing is our immediate aim, our distant purpose, as it were. And it behooves to look into the path of meditation, which is the 4th path, which is where you cultivate the insight that is gained in that aha moment and deeply practice the Dharma, expanding the awareness by leaps and bounds. Every stage it multiplies. So that by the time you get to the 10th Bodhisattva stage, you're in cosmic consciousness already. And the distant difference between the 10th stage Bodhisattvas and a full Buddha is so subtle and ephemeral that it's hard to even perceive it. So that's our far goal. But our near goal is still the path of seeing. We need to realize emptiness. To do that, we can follow the Eightfold Path. We can practice what in the Mahayana is known as the six perfections. These six perfections are generosity, which is what leads to the first stage of the Bodhisattva, the joyful stage, because it's a joy to be able to give things, give material objects, give encouragement, confidence, protection, and also give Dharma. Those are the things that you can do to perfect the generosity. And then there's vigor and patience and ethics and concentration and wisdom as the other perfections, the six of them. But the Noble Eightfold Path is the wellspring, is the headwaters of the whole business, and it hasn't gone obsolete, as I said. Now, if 8 things to remember is too much, and you'll notice as you try to remember these things, like the 4 applications of mindfulness, body, feelings, thoughts and emotions, and objects of mind. You have to know those so you can think about them. And likewise, the 4 Noble Truths. There is suffering. There's a cause of suffering, karma. There's a cessation of suffering. There's a Noble Eightfold Path. But at first, at least, it's hard to remember 8 things. If you're reviewing those, you can remember 6 of them maybe, or 7 of them. So it takes a lot of effort to remember some of these lists, but the ones that are really active in the practice are necessary to memorize. So one of the ways to memorize the Eightfold Path is to chunk it. You have the 3 trainings. And you have the bedrock of the 3 trainings. That's right mindfulness and right effort. So mindfulness, effort, and effort are what holds up the practice. And then you have the ethical portion, which is, again, right speech, right action, right livelihood. And then you have the training in concentration, which is samadhi, right concentration. And then you have the training in wisdom, which is right view and right intention. So dividing them up that way, they're easier to memorize. This last bit is a little bit scholastic. I'm trying to make this stuff practical, but it's interesting, so I'll go through it. They say that on the path of seeing, the 16 characteristics of the 4 Noble Truths are clearly understood, and emptiness is realized. So each of the 4 Noble Truths has 4 characteristics, which to my mind are a little bit contrived, but it works pretty well. So under suffering, you have impermanence. I mentioned that briefly. It's a major feature. We have impermanence, suffering, and not self as the 3 characteristics of our samsaric experience. And impermanence, at the time Buddha derived that from his experience, was not so obvious. Everything moved so slowly in those days, 2,500 years ago. And the grandparents had the same experience as the grandchildren. And today, impermanence is in everybody's face. It's obvious that things are changing rapidly. And the grandparents no longer understand the world of the grandchildren because they're living in a different world. They've had a different set of imprints in their childhood experience. So impermanence is a matter of suffering, because we like things to be the same. We like a steady state situation, lots of nice security and good food and excellent house to live in and on like that. But all of that goes away, and it goes away fairly rapidly. So anything in our samsaric experience is impermanence, and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, it's going to fade away. Even mountains wear down from erosion. It just takes time. So some things last longer than others, but it's all impermanent, everything. everything we know is going to go away, and the unknown is going to arise, and that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. But so impermanence gets us out of our comfort zone, and it's a matter of suffering. And suffering itself, the gloss on that, all feelings do not go beyond suffering. And then there's emptiness. There is no owner of entities clung to as being me. That's emptiness of self. There's also emptiness of phenomena. There's no intrinsic nature to anything. Things have no separate self-identity, no separate self-existence. They're empty. And then not self is the fourth of the features of suffering. There's no such thing as a self, no basis for designating a person. So likewise, the origin of suffering has four characteristics. Cause, the root of all suffering. Origin, all suffering originates from it. Can't tell the difference between those two. Arising, intense suffering arises suddenly. Condition, connects with experiencing suffering. Some of those are useful. A cessation of suffering. The features are cessation, future suffering, and its causes have ceased. No cause for future suffering. Peace, all afflictions are at peace. Excellence, it is the Dharma of supreme magnificence, final deliverance from samsara, no falling back. So those are the four features of the cessation of suffering, the third noble truth. The four features of the path. Path on which one is to progress. Being appropriate, path functions as a remedy for all afflictions. Accomplishment, path accomplishes unmistaken states of mind. And path is conducive to deliverance. It leads to the state of stable liberation, nirvana. And now the third item. So far we had mindfulness, the four applications of them. The Noble Eightfold Path, which has right mindfulness as a feature. And now we have what gets close to the path of seeing, the 7 branches of enlightenment. And these 7 branches of enlightenment can be practiced, should be practiced as well as possible, but it's only when they get perfected that they lead to the path of seeing. And eventually, when they're totally perfected, they're part of the emanations of Sambodhi, full enlightenment. So the 7, mindfulness, investigation of dharmas, diligence, bliss or joy, tranquility, samadhi, and equanimity. And I just recently memorized those 7. They're very slippery. It's partly that they go all over the board. You know, they cover the entire ground, those 7. So it takes a little bit more effort to remember 7 things than to remember 5 things. Anyway, mindfulness, awareness in the present moment, it keeps coming up. Now, investigation of dharmas, that's essentially vipassana. And you can examine and reflect on teachings and numerical lists, which I mentioned as a possible exercise. Suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, Eightfold Path. You know, they become part of the deeper mind as we begin to probe into the essence of these ideas. So in this case, investigation of Dharma can involve the teachings and numerical lists, or you can examine and reflect on the phenomena of mind, in other words, on the moment-by-moment manifestations of mind. Dharmas mean both of those things. Effort, joyful diligence, okay, it's everywhere. Again, it's one of those bases of the Noble Eightfold Path, as well as one of the branches of enlightenment. So effort perfected is effortless. I'll have to say that. They say you get to a place in the Dharma, the practice of the Dharma, where it becomes effortless, where it's so thoroughly into the depths of a person's being that it doesn't take any effort to continue to practice. That's a fair ways off, but it's nice to know that all this effort that we apply eventually gets easier. Now, joy, priti, rapture, this bliss doesn't have an opposite. This is the kind of happiness that's beyond sorrow. And it's one of the key items in the first dhyana, the state of concentration that comes after shamatha, basically. I won't go into those details, but concentration of mind is the sixth item of the branches of enlightenment, and concentrated mind is essential for enlightenment, but it happens gradually. We have to work on it. Meanwhile, the fifth item, pliancy, again, have to go back to the Sanskrit, prashrabdi. I have not looked up the roots of that, but pliancy, serenity, tranquility. They say it's kind of like being on a hot day and going under the shade of a cool tree. You know, to have that coolness, that serenity. And also the pliancy of mind. The mind will stay where you put it for a change, which it doesn't ordinarily do. Okay, concentration of mind, again, this is one-pointed concentration. It can go very deep indeed. You can meditate many hours in a day and get to a place of extreme concentration, resulting in a kind of unity of the phenomena. And then the final one, which needs to be practiced as much as possible, anytime, anywhere, is equanimity. Equanimity is a neutral, open emotion. You're present, you're engaged, but you're not either pulling or pushing. You're not experiencing any greed or any anger or any delusion either. Those three primary afflictions have been or are being dissolved in that moment. I wrote sublime indifference as one translation. I don't know how accurate that might be, but it does have a quality of indifference. It just doesn't have that negative connotation of indifference. I don't care. You know, it's indifference that is balanced, completely neutral, and open. So we want to practice all 7 of those at once, but that's impossible at our current level of consciousness. So we do them one at a time. And as I say, these can be worked on any time, and when perfected, they lead directly to the path of seeing. Let me read the last 2 paragraphs, just in case there's something in it. As the true nature of reality becomes clear, these 7 branches of enlightenment manifest in their fullest. Although these 7 have existed all along, at the path of seeing they operate in a pure and total fashion. After this first glimpse of enlightenment, they are fully developed on the path of meditation. The quality and duration of the mindfulness has increased hugely since the first efforts. The awakening of meditation is extended into the daily life. The path of seeing has been reached, as has the first of the 10 bodhisattva stages, the joyful. And with joyful, I guess we'll end. Thank you. Now, if there's questions or comments, now's the time.
When you list it out like this, God, it sounds easy, but it's so hard.
It's hard to do, yes.
It's very hard
And the point of the whole business is it has to be done.
And don't give up.
Yeah, and don't give up. I mean, the abstraction and scholastic elaboration is all just fine. It's inspiring, but it doesn't get you to enlightenment. You know, the only thing that gets you to greater awareness is practice. So, anytime, anywhere, practice.
So easy to forget when you're in the midst of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo.
Under suffering, you have suffering. All feelings do not go beyond suffering. Can you expand on that?
That was the gloss in the book. I can speculate on it. There's a kind of background suffering. The suffering of the five skandhas, the all-pervasive suffering. And even if you have a happy feeling, that background suffering is there, not perceivable. You know, the suffering of being in a body, the suffering of having to constantly work your mind, or let your mind work you, as the case may be. So even a joyful feeling has a component of suffering because we're in a world of suffering. You know, the world of desires are unfulfillable in the long run, so that entails suffering. So in that sense, all feelings are not beyond suffering.
As we progress on the path of staying up, that will soften. That will soften, and it will become easier. Because we've done this work, then through the 9 bhumis, and we get to the end, then, you know. But the thing we need to remember is you can't do this all at once. Well, some people, I guess, can.
If they have...
It just takes constant effort, and really working with that. It's not an easy path.
No, there is no easy path if it's a real path. You know, the easy paths don't go anywhere, ultimately. Or they go to the betterment of humanity in a general way, but not to the enlightened state of consciousness. You know, those practices take effort, especially at first. But it is encouraging to realize the amount of effort decreases. On the other hand, as the obstacles get subtler, they get more powerful. So we have to deal with that our discernment has to be finer. Our behavior has to be more scrupulous, more conscientious. And then there's the other wrinkle, too, when you start taking on power, which you do if you develop a lot of concentration. Concentration definitely leads to psychic power. Then there's the danger of misusing the psychic power and generating a lot of bad karma. So you have to be extra scrupulous as those features develop.
Just go back to right speech and be quiet.
Ah, yes.
It's just really interesting to look at it all and really try to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and this does have a lot in it.
It sure does.
You know, if you dip into it occasionally, probably there'll be some positive results.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Fantastic work.
When you refer to a gloss in the book, what book are you referring to? More than
Where did I see that?
It's on the website, I think, that you did that one. I think
Yeah, frankly, I don't remember where I got that list. It might have been on the web. Might have been in a book. I'm a little bit remiss in my scholarly activity in that I don't do footnotes and I don't do references.
let's see.
And it's a failing. It's partly laziness and it's partly that the information is valid no matter where it came from. And, scholars might want to check up on this or that, but they're going to have to dig deeper if they do. And this is not primarily for scholars, this is for practitioners. Oh, there is a book that has this kind of material in it. It's called What the Buddha Taught. And it's very detailed. It's not the... better yet, the Dalai Lama's book, Path to Enlightenment, has a lot of good Dharma in it. And one that I'm particularly fond of is Reginald Ray. It's called Indestructible Truth. It's about yay thick. And the first half has extensive description of the 4 Buddhist orders and basic history of Buddhism in Tibet and the socio-political realm of Dharma. And then the second half is the best exposition of basic Dharma that I've seen. It spells out all the essentials, simple as possible. It's slow reading, but as simple as possible. Doesn't leave anything out, but doesn't add the bells and whistles either. So that's a good book for basic Dharma, Indestructible Truth.
It's a really good book.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I bought that. I appreciated you telling me about it.
Yeah, it's one of the better ones, and I'm sure there are dozens of others that I haven't even seen, but that's how it goes. There's so much material on the Buddha Dharma anymore that it's an ocean. We can't possibly encompass it at this point.
And the lists, there's just so many lists to remember. Lists upon lists upon lists.
Yeah. There
is a thread through there that are the same. That
yes.
Goes through there, follows that basic.
And you have to use your sense. There are a zillion lists. Not all of them can be applied to practice. Yeah. Or they can be applied to advanced practice, but they're not of much use to us. Like there are 24 charnel grounds where they burn bodies. And these are important in Vajrayana yogas, tantras. But what these 24 are, I don't know. So how can I dwell in them if I don't know where in my body these 24 are? So even though that's useful for practice, it's useful only at a certain stage. What we want is what's useful to us right now. And that's basics. That's continuing to do the work. And the more we do the work, the better the result. I think that's a wrap.